30,000 people walked into this factory every morning, not for a concert, not for a rally, not for war, for work. For nearly a century, the massive industrial complex of the Reynolds Tobacco Company in Winston-Salem did more than manufacture cigarettes. It manufactured stability, routine, identity. It paid mortgages, it filled churches, it funded schools, it built hospitals, it employed an entire city. And then, almost without ceremony, it went silent. The architecture of scale. At its peak, the Reynolds complex was not simply a factory, it was an industrial organism. Red brick buildings stretched across nearly a square mile. Smokestacks marked the skyline like monuments to productivity. Rail lines ran directly into loading docks. Freight cars arrived filled with raw tobacco leaf and left packed tight with finished cartons bound for Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and ports beyond. More than 30,000 workers passed through its gates daily. The factory operated around the clock. 3 shifts. No idle time. The hum of machinery never fully stopped. If you stood in downtown Winston-Salem at midday in the 1940s or 1950s, you could feel it. The rhythm of an industrial heartbeat. The city moved in coordination with shift whistles, traffic patterns synchronized with start times, restaurants filled and emptied in waves dictated by the production floor. This was not a company located inside a town. This was a town orbiting a company. The workforce. Labor as identity. The factory's labor force was a cross-section of Southern transformation. White farmers from Appalachian hills left unpredictable crop cycles in search of steady wages. Black families migrated from sharecropping systems in the Deep South seeking industrial opportunity and escape from agricultural dependency. Inside the factory, conditions were demanding. The air hung heavy with tobacco dust. Machines roared loud enough to dull hearing. Floors vibrated under constant motion. The pace was mechanical and unforgiving. Yet for many, this was something rare in early 20th century America. Predictable income, regular pay, cash in hand. Generations passed through the same gates. Fathers trained sons. Mothers worked alongside daughters. Entire neighborhoods formed around shift schedules. Employment was not temporary, it was identity. To say, "I work at Reynolds" meant stability. It meant belonging to the economic center of the city. Corporate paternalism. A company town, without the name. Unlike some industrial giants that dominated through harsh extraction, Reynolds practiced a form of corporate paternalism. The company funded hospitals, it supported schools, it invested in public parks, it financed worker housing developments, it built infrastructure that blurred the line between employer and municipality. The skyline itself reflected this influence. The Reynolds Building, completed in 1929, rose as a symbol of corporate power and architectural ambition. For decades, it stood as one of the tallest buildings in the South. Winston-Salem did not merely host Reynolds, it was shaped by it. The company's philanthropic contributions made civic life possible. Cultural institutions flourished with corporate backing. Streets bore the imprint of tobacco money. But there was an unspoken truth inside that generosity. When a single corporation underwrites your entire economy, dependence becomes structural. The peak. Prosperity. Without question. By mid-century, prosperity appeared permanent. The camel logo was globally recognized. Production lines grew increasingly automated, but still required massive human oversight. The factory complex expanded repeatedly to accommodate demand. Restaurants thrived near factory gates. Small businesses aligned themselves with shift changes. Schools trained students with the assumption that a stable factory job awaited graduation. Few questioned the future. Cigarettes were normalized. Advertising glamorized smoking as sophistication, masculinity, independence. Television screens, billboards, magazines, all carried the message. The industry felt untouchable. The city believed it had found its forever engine. The first crack. Then came 1964. The U.S. Surgeon General released a report linking smoking to lung cancer and other severe health risks. For the first time, federal acknowledgement challenged the foundation of tobacco's cultural acceptance. Public perception shifted. Not overnight, but steadily. Regulation followed. Warning labels appeared. Advertising restrictions tightened. Lawsuits mounted. Public health campaigns grew louder. Meanwhile, automation advanced rapidly. Machines replaced manual sorting. Packaging lines became faster and more efficient. Where dozens of workers once operated equipment, a handful could now oversee entire systems. Production continued, but fewer hands were required. Locker rooms grew quieter, departments consolidated. The first signs of contraction were subtle but undeniable. The long decline. Through the 1970s and 1980s, the tobacco industry remained powerful, but no longer unquestioned. Litigation increased. Settlement costs rose. Smoking rates declined in parts of the country. Public spaces banned cigarettes. Cultural sentiment shifted from glamour to caution. Inside the factory complex, shifts were reduced. Entire sections closed. Some buildings sat partially unused. For workers, the psychological shift proved harder than the economic one. For decades, employment at Reynolds meant permanence. It meant predictability. Now that permanence felt fragile. The silence. Eventually, major manufacturing operations ceased in Winston-Salem. Machines powered down. Assembly lines halted. The factory whistle, once a daily marker of time, fell silent. No parade, no ceremony, no final shift photo large enough to capture the loss. Just quiet. Restaurants near the gates saw fewer customers. Shops struggled. Real estate values wavered. Neighborhoods that once pulsed with industrial certainty felt contraction. But the deepest loss was not financial. It was psychological. The aftermath. What happens when the center collapses? When an entire city is economically oriented around one corporation, closure ripples outward. Skills built around industrial tobacco production did not easily translate into other sectors. Older workers faced retirement earlier than expected. Younger workers confronted uncertainty. Civic institutions, once supported by tobacco revenue, faced funding adjustments. The skyline remained, but its meaning changed. The smokestacks still stood, but they no longer exhaled. For many residents, the silence felt unnatural. The absence of machine noise created a vacuum where routine once lived. An industrial empire had receded. Reinvention, instead of ruin. Yet Winston-Salem chose not to erase its past. Rather than demolish the complex, the city opted for reinvention. The former tobacco warehouses and factory floors were transformed into what is now known as the Innovation Quarter. Research institutions moved in. Biotechnology firms established laboratories. Universities expanded into renovated brick buildings once filled with tobacco dust. Old loading docks became collaborative spaces. Massive industrial windows now flood research labs with light instead of smoke. The smokestacks remain, but they signify adaptation rather than combustion. The city that once exported cigarettes now exports research, technology, and medical innovation. The meaning of the silence. Industrial power built Winston-Salem, but cultural change transformed it. The story of Reynolds is not just about tobacco. It is about economic concentration, about what happens when a single employer becomes synonymous with identity. For nearly a century, Reynolds did not simply provide wages. It structured daily life. When it fell silent, the city was forced to confront a fundamental question: who are we without the factory? Reinvention required courage. It required acknowledging that permanence is often an illusion. It required transforming infrastructure without erasing memory. The red brick buildings still stand. The rail lines still run. The skyline remains familiar, but the rhythm has changed. The larger lesson: factories rarely announce their final breath. They don't collapse dramatically in a single moment. They slow, they automate, they consolidate. They close quietly, and cities must decide whether to decay or adapt. Now the gates still stand, but what passes through them is different. The factory that employed an entire city went silent, and in that silence, a new identity began to form. Survival required reinvention, and Winston-Salem, shaped by industry, learned how to shape itself again.